I guess let's just start. I'll do the introduction part, and if anybody else connects, I guess they can also look at the recordings, and so that we don't lose too much time. I think that might be working best. So just a couple of housekeeping and introduction at the beginning. This call is being recorded, so please be aware if you don't like to be recorded or if you don't consent, you can watch the video afterwards on our channels that you find here. I post the channels in the chat as well. Just give me a second. Okay, so you have the links, everything. There you go. Who are we? We is Augustine and me, and of course our guest speakers. Augustine and me were created this group and trying to connect you with the best speakers regarding different topics around Power BI and everything related to Power BI and analytics. You can find our profiles. Feel free to add us if you didn't do so already. Another kind of introduction, maybe some of you have heard or already connected to the Data Jazz on Tuesdays. This is something that Augustine is doing with Nicola. And it's a slightly different format than this one. It's live, and it's definitely worth checking out. So if you haven't done so, just put a reminder in your calendar. This is something that you really shouldn't miss. You're gonna love it. And as for the next sessions, next week, we have Matthias Tieberbach, and then we have a slight break afterwards. So 1 week where there's nothing happening, and after that, Mara with Power BI Performance Made Easy, and of course, as mentioned, the Data Jazz on Tuesdays. And with that, I want to hand it over to our guest speaker today. Thanks a lot, Johnny, and the stage is yours.
Cool, thank you very much. Right, I will share my screen. I feel really bad now because you had a wonderful resolution image of the Power Platform Stuttgart logo there, and I've got a horrible grainy one that I just scraped off the internet. So I probably should have just asked you for the higher resolution one. But yeah, thank you very much for inviting me along. Thank you very much to all the people that have tuned in as well. I am here to talk about dynamic measures in Power BI. First things first, the boring bit, talk about myself a little bit. So my day job is that I'm a data analytics consultant. I work for a company called Waterstones, who are a business and IT consultancy. If anybody is from the UK, there's a famous bookshop in the UK called Waterstones. Everybody thinks I work for them, but I don't. It's Waterstones. We're an IT consultancy. We don't just do data. So whereas I work in data analytics, we have a division that do bespoke software. We have a cybersecurity division, infrastructure, business consultancy, among other things. So not just data, but we do have a data analytics team where I work. We're quite small. I think there's 10 of us at the moment. We don't just do Power BI. We do the full Microsoft data platform. So we are a gold partner for data analytics and a silver partner for data platform, working with Microsoft. A little bit about my background personally. I've worked with business intelligence software since 2007. I know it's 2007 because I have a certificate that says I did a 2-day training course on crystal reports. So if anybody is lucky enough that they've experienced crystal reports before, that was my pain. That's sort of my background. In the last 6 years or so, I've focused more on Microsoft technologies, and again doing the full data stack. So what I now describe as vintage Microsoft BI, which is all kind of the on-premise integration services, analysis services, reporting services. That's all the kind of thing I was doing 5 or 6 years ago. The last year or so, I get to do some of the sexy cloud things. So I work with Data Factory, a little bit of Databricks, and of course Power BI. Power BI is absolutely my favorite part of the stack. I spent a lot of time working with analysis services, tabular models. So a lot of my data modeling and DAX experience comes from that. But I absolutely love working with Power BI. So much so that I set up my own website just to blog about it. So I've got a website there which you can check out where there's a blog. I'm pretty active on Twitter. Thank you, Fernando. I love the Skeletor GIF. Perfect. Yeah, very active on Twitter. Mostly just banter and jokes, to be honest, but feel free to give me a follow. I've got a YouTube channel where I do some Power BI content on there as well, and I've got a page up on LinkedIn. Cool. So that's enough about me. I'm here to talk to you about dynamic measures. And I think probably the first question to ask is, what is a dynamic measure? Now, I don't think it is a term or something that you'll find that in Microsoft Docs or a part of any official training. It is almost me, just a term I've made up, really, when I talk about a dynamic measure. So I think to sort of qualify what I mean when I say it, the easiest thing is to show you. So here I have a Power BI report, and I have a card up in the top right hand corner showing 4.27 billion and labeled as my dynamic measure. And if I select that measure, you can see in the fields there's just literally one measure in there. Likewise, I've got a graph here showing trend over the last 12 months. And if I select that, again, there's literally just one measure in here. And then I've got a slicer across the top showing a measure selection. So currently I'm showing sales revenue. I can pick a different measure and I can show sales costs. I can pick another measure again and I can show sales margin. So when I talk about a dynamic measure, what I mean is a measure where I can dynamically change which calculation is happening. I can switch it in the background so that it shows me a different calculation depending on what's selected from a slicer. That answers the what. I guess the next obvious question is why. What's the reason that you might decide to implement a dynamic measure in your report? The first answer I give is because it's cool. It's just a nice little feature. It's quite nifty. You show this to your colleagues or your manager, and it just adds a bit of functionality that people can be impressed by. Getting a bit more serious, why are they good? So they can help you save space on your reports. The default canvas on a Power BI report is relatively small, and if you need to pack a lot of information onto there, then by using a dynamic measure, you've got the opportunity to give your end users the opportunity to see more information, but taking up less space because you're showing one thing at a time. That might also be preferable because if you overload people with lots of information, they might find it harder to digest. So giving them the option to just see one measure at a time can help them process that information with a little bit more clarity. The other thing is there's a potential performance benefit here. So I was recently at a talk that Augustine gave on sort of Power BI best practices, and one of the things that he highlights is that if you have too many visuals on one page, it will slow down your report. You have to have a call to your data model running a DAX query for every single visualization that appears on the canvas. And so rather than having many visuals, which could slow down the performance of your report, just having one visual that allows you to toggle in between different measures is potentially one way that you could just help improve that performance of the report as well. So they're the reasons that I'd give as to why I think that this is useful. I guess the next question is the how. So do the reactions work on this Teams meeting out of interest? So if I ask the question and say, how many people have implemented dynamic measures before? Can you hit the hand? There we go. Christian's got her hands up. Just flash up who else. Yep, Joel has. Anybody else? Hannah, cool. Brilliant. Fernando too. Awesome. Even if you've done this before, I'm hoping that I'll still be able to give you something to learn from today. Want to take you through some different ways you can implement this, some of the pitfalls, like if there are any limitations in terms of being able to do it, and hopefully maybe even teach some new techniques and ways that potentially you haven't done this before. So I'm going to demonstrate 3 methods basically. This is the first method that I'm going to show you, which I am going to call a disconnected table with a switch measure method, which is a bit of a mouthful, but I'll talk you through it. So when I say disconnected table, what I mean is a table in my data model that is doesn't have any relationship to the rest of my data model. So if I expand this, down here in the bottom left-hand corner, I have this disconnected table, which I'm using to facilitate my dynamic measure. Now, you may use disconnected tables for other things. I personally like to have a measures table, which is always disconnected as well. I also have a convention in my reports whereby I like to prefix my disconnected tables. So I put a little @ symbol in there. I just think from a usability perspective, it just makes it easier to point out that it isn't part of the wider data model. It is a disconnected table. So that's my personal preference in terms of a naming convention. So we've got the disconnected table. If we have a look in the data view, we can see what that disconnected table looks like. So I've literally got 2 columns. I've got a column with my measure selection, which shows the list of the measures I want to include in my dynamic measure. What I've also implemented in this example is a sort order as well. Strictly speaking, I don't think you have to have this as a feature, but what I've tended to find is that if I'm providing a dynamic measure, I like to specify what order those measures appear in, because potentially a particular KPI might be deemed as more important or something that you want people to focus on and look at first. So I've created a sort order as well there to go alongside each of those available measure selections. Now you've got a couple of different techniques you could use to create that disconnected table. You could do it in DAX, so you could write a calculated table with a DAX statement. What I prefer to do is to use the enter data option. So you've got the enter data option in the ribbon at the top in Power BI, and if you use that, you can literally just hands type whatever information you want in here. So if I do sort order.
I'm not sure if it's only on my side or if yeah, okay, sorry. Now I can see it.
Okay, cool. And then you could add your measures in the second column. So I find that the easiest way to do it, and you'd give your table name down here. Okay, so that's how I've created that particular measure table. So the next part of the puzzle, having done the disconnected table, is to actually do the DAX to support it. So I've got a measure here called dynamic measure. And this is the DAX. So first of all, there's a variable which is returning which measure name has been selected from the slicer. And then that's followed up by a switch statement. So that switch statement is saying, based on the selection, if someone selects sales revenue, display my sales revenue measure, sales cost, display the sales cost, sales margin, display the sales margin. And if there is no selection, just return a blank as the default. So they're the moving pieces, I guess, in terms of being able to implement this technique using that method, and it all works really well. So as we sort of saw before, I can click between my selections, my card here changes as expected. We can see the measure selection changes here as well. It's pretty responsive, it's nice and quick. That works pretty well. So again, throwing it out to the audience, if you want to go with a hands up, who has done this way before? Just out of interest. Cool. I would describe this as like the old school way to do it. I think the first time I ever implemented dynamic measures, this is the technique that I used. And the I guess the code and the tools you need to be able to do it have been available in Power BI for a long time as well. There are drawbacks with this particular method. So go over to example number 2. So at this point, it becomes a bit of a spot the difference competition because this report is slightly different from the first one that I showed you. So still got my graph, still got my card, and I've got my sales revenue here. What I've done is I've changed up which measures are being used. So as well as sales revenue, I've also got my unit quantity and my margin percentage. So let's see what happens when we interact with this. So unit quantity. Okay, so this gives us a bit of a strange result because unit quantity should be a whole number, it should be an integer, but it's still showing in pounds. Excuse the pounds, I'm based in the UK. Let's go with the sales margin as well. This looks even stranger. So again, it's got it as a currency, and if I look in my axes as well, it's showing a value of 56 pence. Now, the reason for that is easiest to demonstrate if I show you these in a matrix. So what I can do with a matrix is I can pull on my measure selection field and I can display all 3 measures at the same time, and they're all displayed in currency. And the reason for that is when you create a measure, you can only specify one format string for it. So these all have to be the same. In our previous example, because revenue and cost and margin were all monetary values, it was absolutely no problem. But in this scenario, we've got actually different data types that need to be returned. So this first method doesn't quite work for us. So there's a second method. Jeannie, do you have a question, or have you just got your hand up still from me asking if people have done it this way before? Cool. I shall carry on. Thank you. Right. So second method, I have got here in my measures this time around something called dynamic measure formatted. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to show you the DAX. Again, this looks really, really similar to the first one, and it's a very, very similar technique. The only difference here is that for each of the return elements in our switch measure, we're actually wrapping our measure in a format string. So for the first one, if we select sales revenue, then we want to return the sales revenue measure, but we want to wrap it in a currency format string. Likewise, if we select unit quantity, we want to return the unit quantity measure, but wrapped in a string that returns a whole number. And lastly, margin percentage now will be returned as a percentage because we've wrapped it in that format function. So if I add this new measure on, brilliant. This seems to do exactly what we want. So sales revenue is now showing in currency. Unit quantity is a whole number, and sales margin now showing a percentage. Fantastic stuff. So if I go back to my first page, what I can do is I can look at changing some of these up. So I'm going to swap out my card so it shows the formatted measure. You have to excuse the fact that it doesn't quite fit, but you can see that that is showing in a currency, and the unit quantity is now showing as a whole number, and the sales margin percentage is showing as a percentage. Brilliant, that's exactly what we want. So if I come down to my graph now, I'm going to remove my dynamic measures from there and bring my formatted dynamic measure onto the values, it doesn't let me do it. I physically cannot get this new measure to be added to my graph. So the reason is exactly what Fernando has said in the chat, basically, because we've wrapped that value in a format string. It's now been converted to text. Now, if you want to display that in a textual context, if you want to display as text, so if you're using a card or a matrix or a table, that works fine. It can deal with it. But if you try and drag that onto a visual like a chart or a graph, because text can't be aggregated, it just doesn't work. So this method 2 is flawed as well. Method 1, fantastic if all your measures can use the same format string. Method 2 works if you need to switch out the formats, but the pitfall then is you can only actually display them for certain visual types and not the more visual ones. So method 2 kind of falls short as well. So on to method 3. Here we go. Because there is a third way. So the third way is to use a calculation group. So again, because I like to be interactive, does anyone want to stick their hand up if they've used calculation groups before? Cool. Okay. So calculation groups as a feature was made available in analysis services back in 2019. So analysis services, which under the hood uses the same engine as Power BI, still uses Vertipack. It's been around as a feature for a long time, but in terms of being able to use it with Power BI, the only time it became available is once Microsoft opened up the ability to use external tools with Power BI. So at this point in time, in terms of doing a calculation group, you can't do it in Power BI. You've got to use a third-party tool to be able to do it. I'm led to believe you can theoretically do it with Visual Studio. I've never seen it done with Visual Studio, and I honestly wouldn't have the first idea how. The tool that I've always done it with is Tabular Editor. So that's the method I'm going to show you now. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that dynamic measure table from my model. So first thing I've done is I've broken all my visuals. I've got rid of my disconnected dynamic measures table. I've deleted my dynamic measure DAX calculation as well. And then I'm going to go to external tools. Now, where I work for Waterstones, I'm really, really fortunate that they pay for me to have a Tabular Editor 3 full enterprise license. So very privileged from that perspective. Today, I am not on my work PC. I am on my personal PC, and I haven't got myself a Tabular 3 license. So we're just going to go with the old school Tabular Editor 2. I guess this kind of demonstrates that in terms of implementing this as a feature, you don't have to be using the paid version of Tabular Editor. The free version does it absolutely fine. The flip side of that, I know that there are some organizations who are a bit twitchy about using open source tools and might not let you download those and use those. What I would say to that is that in this day and age, if you really want to be sort of at a high level of development in Power BI, then you need to be using these external tools. So wherever you work, if currently they say, nope, you can't use that, it's open source, try and open a dialogue with whoever those decision makers are, with, if it's IT or IT security. In terms of the benefits you'll get from using these tools, it really is worth going through the pain to try and have a business case signed off and get those kind of tools approved. It not only opens up like extra features, like I'm about to demonstrate, there are also so many extra wonderful add-ins that you can use that will help you from a productivity perspective. So I'm not here to go into those today. There is a lady, Mary Filty, who is doing a talk at the minute about introduction to Tabular Editor. So she's done a few user groups, and I think there are a few chats online. If you're not familiar with Tabular Editor, I would absolutely recommend checking out that talk. But yeah, Tableau is ace. Everybody should be using it. Right. Method 3, using a calculation group for doing dynamic measures. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come across to my Objects Explorer on the left. And right-click my tables, create new, and create a calculation group. Now, because I deleted my disconnected table from my report, what I need to make sure I do now is use the same naming conventions, because hopefully then when it loads the calculation group, it will just replace all of those old calculations and fields in the report. So my table was called @dynamic measures. Okay. And then when you create a calculation group, you'll automatically get a column in there that's called name. It's called name by default. That is the column that will hold all the names of your calculation items. Now, again, to match my naming convention from previously, I need to change that. So I'm going to call that measure selection. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create my dynamic measure. So again, that was called dynamic measure. And then in the and over in the expression editor, I want to put in the expression here what my default value is for my dynamic measure. So by default, if nothing's selected, I want this to be blank. Oh, wrong thing. There we go. Okay, next step is we want to add the calculation items. So what we want is we want one calculation item for each of the measures we want to display. So first calculation item, I'm going to call sales revenue. So effectively what we're saying here is if the sales revenue calculation item is selected, return the sales revenue measure. Now what I could do is I could write the measure into my expression editor on the right here, but the easier thing to do is I can literally grab it and drag it across. So first one sorted. I need to do sales cost. Okay. And I need to do sales margin percentage. Awesome. So I've set up my calculation group. I've renamed the column in my calculation group to measure selection. I've created my dynamic measure with a default value, and I've created one calculation item for each of my measures that I want to display. So what I need to do now is save that back to my model. So I've got the save button up here. When I close that, if you implement a calculation group in Power BI, you'll have to refresh the model. You'll get a little one in here. Calculation groups need to be manually refreshed. So I need to hit refresh now. And if I've done it all right, everything should automatically. Oh no. Right, what have I done wrong? Let's have a quick look. Dynamic measure, not dynamic measures. I hope. Cool. So that's worked. I basically had given it the wrong name. I'm glad that didn't go horribly wrong. Right. Okay. So visuals have now been repopulated. First thing to notice, I had originally set that sort order. So I always wanted my sales revenue to appear first, and I've now lost my sort order. My sales revenue's jumped to the end and sales cost has come to the beginning. So that's not quite the effect that I wanted. Still showing us 4.27 billion here. Okay, so let's check out the costs. Oh, I've done costs when I needed to do unit. Hang on, right. Bear me a second. Okay. That's what I wanted. Right, back to it. So sales unit quantity should be a whole number, is just about showing as a whole number. Sales margin percentage is still showing a funny format here, because again, that should be a percentage, but it's showing as 0.56. Even my sales revenue, even though at first glance it's kind of the right number, I've lost my currency formatting as well. So my sort order has gone skew whiff. I'm getting my measures in the wrong order. My issue with the formatting still hasn't been sorted. I'm still not getting the result that I want because it's showing the wrong formats for each of these measures. And then there's one other strange behavior that you may or may not have spotted, which is down here in this multi-row card. So this multi-row card here is showing our sales revenue, unit quantity, and margin percentage. And all of a sudden, it's now showing the same value across all three measures. So again, if I click on my sales margin, it does it again. It shows my sales revenue as a currency, sales unit quantity as a whole number, and my margin as percentage. But basically, whenever I change my selection for my measure, it applies the calculation item to everything, not just to my dynamic measure. So whenever you're implementing calculation groups, you have to bear that in mind, that by default, that's going to affect every measure, not just necessarily a particular measure you're looking for. So I can fix all of these things. So I'm going to head back into Tabular Editor. I am going to, first of all, I'm going to delete sales costs because I didn't want to anyway. That was a mistake on my part. So I'm going to fix the sales revenue first. Now, what I want to do is I want to make sure that when I select this calculation item, it only ever affects my dynamic measure. It doesn't affect everything. And the way to do that is to wrap it in an if statement. So now basically what I'm saying is that only if the selected measure is the dynamic measure do I want you to apply this this measure to it. Otherwise, just ignore the calculation group and return whatever the measure is. So wrapping the calculation item expression in that should sort out that first issue. Next one I'm going to look at is the formatting. So in the properties for the calculation item, I've got an option here to look at a format string expression. Again, I'm going to do something similar now. So grab a bit of code I've already prepared. I'm going to use some similar syntax. I'm basically now saying that if the selected measure is the dynamic measure and somebody selected my sales revenue calculation item, then wrap this in a currency string. So make sure I get the right format for that particular one. And then what I need to do very quickly is do it for the other measures as well. Sales margin. And I'm going to grab a quick drink. Okay, so that should sort out my first two issues. It should only affect the dynamic measure and all my formats should be sorted. The other issue was my sort order. So I want my revenue to appear first. Now, the property on a calculation group that controls the sort order is called the ordinal. By default, the calculation group will set the ordinal for every item to -1. So it basically treats them all as the same. But if I want to specify an order, what I can do is change that ordinal value. It's a zero-based ordering, so it starts from 0. So the very first item you want to set that property to 0, and then the second item will be 1, third item will be 2, and so on and so forth. Now you can change that using the properties pane here if you like, but actually the easier thing to do is just to literally drag and drop it on the left-hand side. So I can literally grab revenue here, drag it to the top of the list, and then you'll see that magically the ordinal has automatically changed to 0 there. And then likewise, sales margins shown 1. And unit quantity will be shown 2. So that's just basically a quicker and easy way to do it. So theoretically, that should have sorted all of the issues that I had. Let's save it and hope that I've actually done it right first time this time. Let's give it a go. Great, it worked. Yes. So it loaded at least. It wasn't all broken. Let's check if it does what we're expecting it to. So sales revenue is back to the front. Good start. My dynamic measure is showing it as a currency, so it's in the right format string. And I can see that both in the card up here in the top right and on my axis in the bottom left as well. And then my multi-row card on the right here, even though I've got sales revenue selected, my sales unit quantity and sales margin percentage are showing the right values as well. And if I select sales margin, awesome. So now I've got 58.8% in my card, and my axis is showing the right numbers too. Again, my multi-rows unaffected. Sales unit quantity now shown as a whole number. Perfect. This basically now does everything that I need it to. So this third technique is kind of my personal favorite. For me, it overcomes the shortfall of those first two techniques. Its only drawback is the fact that you have to be able to use tabular editors to be able to implement it. The fun does not stop here, because this third technique gets even better. So one of the things that I was basically saying in terms of why tabular editor is such a great tool is because you get all of these extra features and productivity hacks that come with it. And one of those sort of productivity features is the ability to execute scripts. So if you've got a task that's repeatable and you can apply some logic to it to do those steps, you can turn it into a script and then basically automate all of this. So whilst I painfully made you guys sit and watch me hand type all of that, I can actually do this in a few button clicks. So again, I need tabular editor for it. So let's open that first. The other thing just to note is on this version of this report, I haven't got dynamic measures in it. So I've removed that disconnected table. I've removed the measure as well. I'm basically starting clean from a data model that doesn't have the feature in it already, just to show that. Okay, so tabular editor here. UV, I will show you in a second. I will show you this first. So over here on GitHub, so I've got a Grayscale Analytics GitHub repository with a dynamic measures repo, and I've got a script called dynamic measures calculation group script. So I'm not going to talk you through the script step by step. What I have done is I've tried to put as many comments as I can in there to try and explain exactly what it does. Mostly because I'm not a C# developer. My C# is terrible, so that's for me as much as anything else. But hopefully, like people, that helps explain what each thing does to everybody. So I'm going to copy the contents of the script. And then I'm going to head back to Tabular Editor. In advanced scripting, I'm going to paste my scripts back in there. And then I'm going to hit execute button. And the first thing I do when I hit the execute button is it's going to throw an error. But it's done it on purpose. Basically, what I'm saying here is that you have to select one or more measures so it knows which ones to apply the calculation group to. So the idea of the script is that you don't, if you've got a really, really big model that's got lots and lots of measures, you might not necessarily want to have them all added. The idea is that you select the ones that you want to have. In terms of the demonstration, I think apart from when I messed it up and I had 4 measures in there, but I was trying to stick to 3 measures just for saving time, because if I'd done 5 measures, then it would have been even longer you guys sitting here watching me doing some typing. But because this is an automated version, I can literally select all of my measures in my model and hit my execute script. And the first thing it'll do is it brings up a dialog box, easy enough for me to say, asking for you to provide a name for your calculation group. Now, this is my script. So because it's my script, I've set all the defaults to follow the naming convention that I like. By all means, if people want to take their own copy of the script and change the defaults, you can grab it from GitHub, you're absolutely welcome to, or you can use my script and it will just let you overwrite what you want to call it here anyway. So I'm going to call my calculation group @dynamic measure again. Then I get another dialog box that says, what do I want the column to be called? That I'm going to select my dynamic measures from. I'm going to call it measure selection. And then finally, what do I want to actually call my dynamic measure? And I'm going to call it dynamic measure. And magically, what you'll see over here on the left-hand side, all of that painful typing you watched me done before has literally been executed at a click of a button. So I've got all my calculation items there. In answer to Yuvi's questions, where did you add the format string measure? So I'll show you here. If I pick my sales revenue measure here, and I go to the expression editor, so your calculation item has an expression editor, and currently I'm selecting the expression. There's 2 ways you can do it. So the way I've always done it is there's a drop-down box here at the top, and if you select the format string expression, that's where you input it. So that's how I've always done it. You can actually edit it down here in the properties pane as well if you want to, but I've always used the expression editor. I guess it kind of gives you some IntelliSense. UV, you don't have to do it in Power BI. You do it in calculation. You do it in Tabular Editor, sorry. And yes, Joel, that's exactly what it does. It automatically brings in the format of the base measure. So in this example, the base measure was currency, so it's grabbed the currency from the script. Has basically sort of said, right, well, if you selected sales costs, I'm going to go get what the sales cost format string is and then add that. So yeah, that's exactly how it works, Joel. Cool. Right, the only thing the script doesn't do is set that ordinal. So yeah, if you're selecting a large number of measures, I don't think there'd be an effective way to specify what you want the sort order to be. So again, the way to do that is to just drag it and drop it as we did. So I'm going to get sales revenue to the top again, and then save this back to my model. Close this. Oh, don't need this anymore. Refresh my model here, and you should see that my dynamic measure has appeared on the right-hand side. So let's really, really quickly build ourselves a report. So got all my selections here. And I can grab my chart here. Yep, doing the wrong bits. Yeah, that's not on. let's make that look nicer because we all like pretty looking reports. And there we go. So in a relatively quick amount of time, it's quicker than that when I do it first time around, but when I get it wrong, it isn't. But yeah, really, really quickly there, being able to take a data model that didn't have any dynamic measures implemented, using a script in Tabular Editor, run that script, and then there we go, it's done straight away. Kamal, you want to know how to access the script? I have got it. I'll stick it in the chat now. There you go. So it's it's there for you to go for it. So yeah, technique number 3 for me covers the pitfalls of the first 2. The only thing it doesn't do, and again this is I guess a potential gotcha, is for this dynamic measure in the calculation group, you can't reference your dynamic measure in other measures further downstream. So for argument's sake, if you wanted to do a dynamic measure previous year calculation, as soon as you try and reference that dynamic measure in a separate measure, the calculation group's no longer going to get applied, basically because we've already pinned it to a specific measure, so it doesn't do it. So that is, or up till 3 months, I should say, no, 3 months, up till a month ago, this was the end of the presentation. So I prepared this session. This is the second user group that I've presented at, and I kind of agreed to do a couple of talks and picked a topic and did all my preparation, did my slides, made my example reports, did a bit of a script, and was really, really happy with stuff. And then in the last month, specifically in March, we've had 2 really big Power BI events, in fact 3. There was the Power BI Global Summit at the start of the month, which is an online event. There was SQL Bits, which is an in-person event down in London that I was fortunate to go to. And then earlier this week, sort of at the weekend, there was an event, a Dutch event, which I'm really, really sorry, I don't know how to pronounce, but it was like a Dutch Power BI event. And all 3 of those events had quite a big Microsoft presence. So at the Global Power BI Summit, Will Thompson, who's the product manager for Power BI, did the keynote speech. And he announced in that some new features coming to Power BI. And guess what? He announced, bearing in mind, this is me 2 weeks out from doing my first ever public talk. He announced that dynamic measures are basically coming to Power BI Desktop natively. So the 3 techniques I've just showed you might potentially become moot because they're just going to be available to do these dynamic measures in Power BI itself. Patrick LeBlanc from GynaCube, he presented it at SQL Bits. Unfortunately, I wasn't in that session. I was at SQL Bits, fortunately enough, and I don't know where I was, but I wasn't in Patrick's session, so I didn't get to see it. I didn't get to see it presented, so I haven't actually seen the feature. I've talked to a few people about it. I've talked to a few guys from Microsoft. I've talked to a few other guys in the community who had seen it demonstrated. There is, I guess, at this stage, have I just wasted your time for 40 minutes by showing you all those wonderful techniques when you're not going to need them anymore? So I guess there's a couple of things that are hopefully have made this worthwhile for you. First of all, that new feature is not going to be available until at least the end of May, by all accounts. And even then, it's only going to be a preview feature, so it's not going to be generally available. If you're cautious about using preview features and things like your production reports, then potentially that means that you're going to be waiting even longer for that functionality to be there. I guess the second caveat is that we don't know if there are going to be any limitations or what those limitations are going to be. I had initially heard that it could only deal with up to 3 items at a time as the dynamic measure. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I stole this image from Prathi Kamasani. So Prathi is a data platform MVP, does quite a lot of public speaking as well. And she was at the Dutch event watching this being presented. Now, somebody had told me that it was, somebody had told me that it's going to be limited to 3 items only. And if I look at this photo that Prathi took, that looks like it's got 5 in it already. So maybe it is a limitation, maybe it isn't. They're definitely certainly doing it in the tabular editor script. I only had 5 measures in my model, but in other models that I have worked with, when I've had many more measures, I've still been able to do it really quickly. And thanks very much, Jeannie. Like even if this isn't limited to more than 3 measures, maybe the tabular editor way is going to be quicker and easier to use anyway. So fingers crossed, sharing this information hasn't been completely useless for you. But also, I guess, kind of like just that exclusive news that it's not that exclusive because a few other people have talked about it already, but the feature is going to be coming to Power BI Desktop. I don't think they're going to call it dynamic measures. As I understand it, it's going to be called value parameters. So you'll be able to set a parameter for a value in a measure, is how I understand that's going to work. So yeah, hopefully, as I say, I can get a little bit more mileage out of doing this talk, and it's not totally useless yet, but that kind of potential 4th way of doing it is in the pipeline. That is everything I had to show. Anyone get any questions? There was a question on tabular editor comprehensive documentation. Comprehensive is not quite right. It's there is on the tabular editor website. Let's see if I can see if my Google foo can help me now. Live Google him. Advanced topics. Advanced scripting in tabular editor. So absolutely, on the tabular editor website, there's loads of really cool documentation on it, where the sort of tips for what you can do, some example snippets that you might want to use as well. I searched high and low for all of the right objects to reference when I wrote my script, and definitely this documentation doesn't quite capture everything. I had to basically search in the depths of the internet to try and find the right objects to be able to do the script I used, and ended up with a little bit of trial and error as well. But certainly to get you started, there is loads of documentation available there. I'll stick that in the thing as well. Yeah, it is limited. I agree. I agree. That's the best that there is at the minute. There's some stuff on the. Is that going to be it? There we go. MSDN will take you through, and you can start learning about what all the possible objects that you can reference and all the possible methods are. But even then, I found trying to do something that was quite bespoke, I still struggled to get it to work. But ultimately, I did. So there we go. Anyone else? Otherwise, I will also say thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks a lot, Johnny. It was a really interesting session, and definitely not useless. I guess there's something that we can take away from and maybe integrate in some of our own projects. So thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for presenting this and the great presentation. And yeah, if there's no more questions, I'll just quickly wrap it up with the last slide.
Thank you very much, Johnny.
No problem.
Okay, you should be able to see. So as mentioned in the beginning, next week, Matthias Tieberbach is going to present what is Git and how do I get started. Then we have a week break, and afterwards we have Mana. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you all next week. If you haven't done so, subscribe to our channels, check out Johnny's other content, and happy to have you all. Thanks for being here.